Rondo was St. Paul's largest Black neighborhood. African American families who had lived in Minnesota for decades, and others just arriving from the South, made up a vibrant community that was, in many ways, independent of the white society around it. Black Minnesotans navigated an openly segregated world. Contrary to popular belief, systemic racism and segregation was not limited to the Jim Crow South. White Minnesotans shut Black Minnesotans out from neighborhoods, restaurants, schools, hotels, and many other public places. But for St. Paul's Black community, Rondo was a haven of safety and joy. From the beginning, Rondo was a refuge for people of color and immigrants. Its namesake, Joseph Rondo, moved there in the late 1850s from a site close to Fort Snelling, where he had faced discrimination due to his wife's mixed white and indigenous heritage. French-Canadian immigrants followed Rondo to the area in the late 19th century. Later, German, Russian, Irish, and Jewish families found homes there. African Americans began to migrate to the neighborhood around the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In the 1910s and 1920s, Rondo experienced a social and cultural boom. Music and theater flourished. African American newspapers, such as The Appeal, the Northwestern Bulletin, and the St. Paul Recorder, represented Rondo's interests and needs. In 1913, St. Paul established its chapter of the NAACP, making it a center for civil rights activity. As Rondo's Jews advanced economically in the first decades of the 20th century, they moved to new areas. This left behind more affordable housing for African Americans, combined with pervasive housing discrimination in the form of racial covenants and redlining. Over half of St. Paul's Black population lived in Rondo by the 1930s. Supported by the booming railway industry and local businesses, Rondo's Black families were upper middle and middle class, as well as working class. Integrated schools, such as Central High School, created a relatively high level of education. This openness and upward mobility attracted Southern African Americans looking to escape the Jim Crow South. Despite the racism of the larger society, Rondo's residents created a world where they could fully realize their lives, dancing the night away at social clubs.
We square danced. They made sure that we knew the jitterbug, but they also taught us that the world is much bigger than the jitterbug. And I remember many a times when we were doing do-si-do and Around You Go, the way people really celebrated. And you wind up with the joy of Rondo.
Churches that served as the bedrock of the community, community organizations, and strong family values all shaped what would later be known as the spirit of Rondo. Rondo was everything. But their world would soon change.
My parents actually lived in Nashville, Tennessee, but my father was from Springfield, Tennessee. My mother lived in Nashville and also Memphis, Tennessee. She lived with her mother in Nashville. My father and her family was basically her mother and a couple of aunts. She didn't have much of a family, and she didn't talk about her family that much. My father, on the other hand, had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. When my mother and father were married in Nashville, Tennessee, my dad worked for the B&B Railroad, and my mom worked in different kinds of department stores. She also worked in cleaning homes, that sort of thing. But my dad could not hold a job working for B&B because he didn't have enough seniority. He also went to college and got a degree from Tennessee State University in agriculture and teaching agriculture. But there was no money. There was no money in doing that. It was very difficult to have a family in doing that. The railroad, though, he had heard that they were hiring individuals in the north, in Minnesota, through the Great Northern Railway system. He thought about it for a while. He talked with my mother, and he said, well, let me go and just check and see what it is I can do to maintain a job. Perhaps I can do that. So he moved to St. Paul for a short period of time to see if he could railroad there, and he was doing good in terms of steady employment. He talked to my mother and said, why don't we move to St. Paul, Minnesota? Because both of them were sick and tired of Jim Crow laws. They were tired of being labeled as second class and third class kinds of citizens. My mother thought about it, and it didn't take much for her to move, because she had told my father she wanted to move. She didn't want, she hated the South. And if they were going to have children, she didn't want them to be a part of any of that. So they both moved to Minnesota.
My mother grew up in Rondos along with my dad. They went to the same high school, coincidentally. My mother was a model for a young Gordon Parks. My father was an athlete. In 1939, he was named to the All-Star High School team in St. Paul. He went to Mechanic Arts as member of the All-Star. He was the only black African-American on the team. Melvin Carter Sr. often told me how it was being on the track team with my father, who was also a basketball and football. Lo and behold, I also was on track team and also on the basketball team. And I played with Melvin Carter Jr. Athletics, and we also talk about how we were on the basketball team and we set a record in that we went a whole season and didn't win a game, didn't even come close to winning a game. But we would also point to who was at fault, whether it was me or, more importantly, Melvin was at fault with us never winning a game. But lo and behold, Melvin went on to his career and became a St. Paul respected police officer, and his son, now this would be Melvin III, is now very successful and a leader as the mayor of St. Paul. That's kind of testimony to the spirit of Rondo that continued through generations.
My grandfather was a blacksmith, and after a while, I think it was 1907, they moved to Minnesota. They would work for, my grandfather would work for the packing house, and when my father got old enough, he began to work, he began to help. I believe he was 12 years old when he left school to work and help the family. Later on, he would work at the packing house, but shortly after that, he got a job with the railroad, which he worked for the railroad his whole life. My mother came from a family of 15 kids in Fort Scott, Kansas. Fort Scott had been a slave state. Most of her family worked for another family. My mother and my uncle were a little more outspoken, so they weren't allowed to actually work by the house. So when my mother's mother died, my grandmother was sent to St. Paul to visit my auntie, who had come here previous, and her little brother, Gordon. And they stayed. And she came to St. Paul she began, her life changed. She began to live that life that she said she was always going to live. And it was in Rondo, because that's where people of color live, for the most part, in St. Paul.
In the Rondo neighborhood, there was a rule that they wanted, everybody who had children wanted their children to do better than them.
You did not speak back to adults or be flippant or roll your eyes or even act up where someone might see you, and that becomes your reputation. That becomes the character of your family. We might be boisterous after winning a game or something like that, but if someone turned around and gave a sign to hush, we did that.
We had our grandparents also instill upon us, along with our parents, the importance of the common good, the importance of being respectful, the importance of gaining education, the importance of working. It was conveyed to us in our youth, that life was going to be good and bad. Nothing was going to become free, was coming free. You were to work for that. And the key to that was to pursue education.
Who would teach us, the men in the family, the boys, that when you went to get in a car, you were to open the door for a woman, and when you got out of the car, you were to go open the door to let them out. That was the standard that she put forth for us. To this day, if my sister is going somewhere with you, and you jump in the driver's side of that car to take off, you'll look over and my sisters will still be standing outside that door. You walked on the outside of them when you walked down the street. You didn't walk on the inside of the sidewalk, you walked on the outside. There was something about protection, or that's the way it was done.
Part of my life and my brothers and my sisters is that we lost our parents at a very young age. Within a 3-year period, lost a set of grandparents, my mother, I lost my father, as my brother and sister did. And we became, in effect, orphans, but we were immediately saved from orphanage status, so to speak. At that time, there was no safety net per se by the Rondo community. We were raised and taken care of and guided by aunts and uncles. And these aunts and uncles, we call them shirt-tail aunts and uncles, were members of the community that stepped forward to come to take care of the 3 Fletcher kids who had lost their parents and lost a set of their grandparents and were living alone. That type of care that came with the village saved our lives, our Fletcher lives, but it was also extended to other families and community members who had difficulties in their lives. That type of background instilled in myself the need to continue to work towards your best, but also work towards the common good. There was a general mood that you kind of felt when you were around the adults that you didn't understand, but something was afoot. And I noticed that there were neighbors coming by, and this wasn't a card party or anything like that. There was something, it was business. And of course, when you're a young kid, you Here, they don't let you in on the business.
I could hear people talking on the phones about it. And I knew that it was something that was serious because of the amount of time that was being taken to discuss things of that nature.
My mother sometimes seemed to be crying, and I didn't know why.
And my dad told me, he said, they want to come through and take our homes.
Everything had changed. And we all changed too.
Construction of Interstate 94 between 1956 and 1968 demolished over 700 homes and destroyed countless businesses, fracturing its identity as a cultural center. Rondo is often defined by what happened to it, its near complete destruction when the freeway came through. But this reduces the story of this historic community to a single event and ignores the living legacy of this place. By the 1930s, commuters and city planners desired an expressway linking the Twin Cities downtown. Two routes were considered. The first was along St. Anthony Avenue, running through the Rondo neighborhood. The second was located farther north. Even though the Rondo option required the removal of far more residential buildings, the St. Paul City Council approved of this route in 1947. This practice, tearing down Black neighborhoods for urban renewal or freeway construction, was repeated in many American cities in the 1950s. The freeway plan was met with quick resistance. The Rondo St. Anthony Improvement Association protested the proposed route and pushed for assistance for those forced to move. In 1956, the Federal Interstate Highway Act funds enabled the Minnesota Department of Highways to acquire land and begin construction through the heart of the Rondo area. In September of that year, residents continued to resist. Police forcibly removed homeowners when they refused to evacuate and make way for wrecking crews. Construction proceeded, and I-94 opened in 1968. 700 homes and 300 businesses were destroyed.
It knocked the air out of you. Is it really? I don't know, as a kid that young, somehow you forget that you watched it burn down. I remember just looking at the stairs and nothing else was there.
The sand that came up and the noise that came up throughout the community 24/7 was just unbelievable.
I'll never forget the person that lived behind me. She was always trying to do her laundry. She used to do her laundry on the lines. She couldn't do that anymore because there was so much dust and debris. It affected her linen and everything that she was hanging on the lines out in the back.
We had cracks in the walls from the construction. It was dangerous too because it cut the entire Rondo community in half, in that you lost these 2.5 or 1.5 blocks and between both sides, and there was no way to get across other than the one bridge that they left up, which was Lexington, and then the Dale Street Bridge until they put footbridges in.
I-94 was not to be, I would say, was it subterranean, like below ground. It was to be on the same level as the current streets and sidewalks. But it was because of his insistence that it is now, was it below ground and therefore much safer. Was it for everybody, was it involved? Also, because of him, they had established many what we call crosswalks, where you can cross over.
Footbridges.
Yes, that's right, footbridges. That's the proper term. Thank you. Footbridges to cross from the south side, to the north side, crossing over I-94. And if you notice that wherever the footbridges are your main churches. Okay, so you have one for Mount Olivet and also for Camphor. You have one for Pilgrim, and you also have another one for St. Peter Claver.
It just was not the same neighborhood. It was just, it just felt totally different.
Leaders tried to convince city officials to support a fair housing ordinance, but failed. Lack of political clout, along with racial and class bias, forced Rondo's residents to relocate. Although the African American community was injured, it maintained a strong, resilient identity.
When we had to move, we all were very sad. But my mother was a very strong woman, and she said every knock should be a boost. We'll get through this. I never forget that.
They knew at that time that LLC meant Negroes Need Not Inquire. And that meant that the homeowner had come to an agreement with the representative that was selling the home. There, you know, we see that this now, we talk about it's written into the covenants of the mortgages and stuff, but it was a much bigger program to stop African Americans from buying property, that they would just verbally say, don't sell this house to any coloreds, and particularly any of them coming out of Rondo. I mean, aside from the 800 homes that were lost, you still had people who were renters that lived in Rondo, and the rental facility was lost. Those people were really hung out to dry because, you know, they didn't even get the devalued rate.
We were a family, as I mentioned, moved 4 half blocks up the street to Dayton Avenue, and we were the first black family that far up. White people didn't speak to us. We were told that we were not to play with their kids, but one day we forgot and walked home together, and white people ran out of their houses and said, we told you not to play with our kids. First got to the new house, my mother, I could tell when she was a little bit nervous, and she would say, whatever you do, don't go up on Selby. And that was just like an invitation for me. I went up on Selby and at 8 years old, and the first thing that happened was the police put me up against the wall and went through my pockets and told me to get home.
The block that we moved away was predominantly white. Mother had died, so we had been there 2 years, and a black church was built exactly kitty corner from our house on Chatsworth and Central. It was Christ Temple Church. And lo and behold, one night my brother and sister and I are woken up, and there's a cross burning. And this is St. Paul, Minnesota. They burned a cross in front of the black church that was there, which was kitty corner from our house. I'm trying to figure out, where am I? What is this?
Remember, after we had moved from Rondo, my parents bought a duplex, and there was already a renter upstairs who was white. And I would go out and burn the trash with him and talk to him on a daily basis, and he was very friendly and very nice man. But after, I think it was the end of the second month, he came down. We were having dinner in the kitchen, and he just said he had to give his notice because he just couldn't rent from niggers. And where we knew that was a derogatory thing, it was something that this man was just used to saying. And my mother just put her hands on the table, which meant for the rest of us to keep our mouths closed. And she told him, well, you've been a very nice tenant, and if you should need a reference, don't be afraid to call.
At that time, I know it's going to be hard for people to believe, but telephone lines were shared. We shared a line with a white family. And the only reason we knew that they were white, they would get on the line and all of a sudden say, nigger, 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 and then hang up in the midst of the conversation. Not only was people listening to your conversation, but they're giving you these racial epithets sporadically until we got it straight. All of this was by design. I mean, it was by more than naive. It was also recognition of that political wealth that was out there and that threat of political change. All of that contributed to the decision to let's run that freeway through Rondo. We went to primarily a segregated elementary school, of which our community was in charge of which the curriculum, the teachers were responsible to our families, our neighbors. And that was a critical element to us.
But attendance was very, very important for all of us. And the whole neighborhood knew what kind of a student you were. It wasn't just your parents.
Older people would often greet you with, "How are your grades? How are your grades?" I mean, when you're in elementary school, when you're in junior high school, hey, before you, "Hi, Regis, how are your grades? Louis, how are your grades?" Education was always the theme, no matter what.
In kindergarten, I had a very difficult time. I wasn't learning the way the other kids were learning. My mother was very, very concerned. In first grade, a psychologist came to test me. The psychologist tested me and told my mother, "You have a son that's mentally retarded." My mother didn't believe that. And so she actually went to the St. Paul Book and Stationery department here in St. Paul and got all the books, all the curriculum that they were using in first grade. And every evening for about 40 minutes or so, we would do some of the curriculum that they were using at the first grade level. I was at the lowest level of reading at the start of the school year. Near the end of the school year, I was a robin. What is a robin? A robin is the highest reading group at first grade level. To this day, it's very emotional for me because I remember how I was treated not being a robin. When I graduated from high school, I had a chance. My father said, "Now we have to find a place for you to go to college."
After doing well in school in terms of my grades, I went to see the guidance counselor who was supposed to give you that guidance of what you were going to do next in your life. And all she could see is maybe the best I might be able to do is go work on the railroad. And there was no shame in that because my father worked on the railroad.
We had several opportunities. I had several different ways to look at college. But a gentleman by the name of Carl Griffin.
We know him.
Came to us and said, "I think it would be good for you to go to Morehead State College."
Carl Griffin, born on December 7, 1947, lived on Rondo Avenue in the heart of the community. His grandparents migrated from the South to St. Paul to escape racial violence. His father's side from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and his mother's side from Texas. His father worked for the Great Northern Railroad, a common job for African American men in the Twin Cities. Carl was deeply influenced by the values of Rondo. He participated in community groups like Cub Scouts, Pilgrim Baptist Church, and attended local schools. Despite pressure from some educators, he was determined to pursue high career aspirations. Guided by the spirit of Rondo, we're all in this together. Carl was kind, caring, and a natural leader. Known for his integrity, he valued honesty and justice, which inspired his career in journalism. Creative and passionate about music, he studied classical piano for 13 years and was described as a polite radical who spoke truth with conviction.
My Uncle Carl has been in my life since I've been born. He was the fourth person to hold me. He took me to my piano recitals when I was young, to McPhail in Minneapolis, and he took me to get my first tie for my senior prom.
Well, he was a dynamic person and always a friendly and courteous student.
He was a joy-filled and joyful person. You know, Carl was very easy to work with, tremendously outgoing spirit. He was a genuinely good person.
We all came from the same neighborhood. We all came from the same village. We all went to the same schools. As we were younger, Carl was one of the older kids that looked out for you also. I mean, he was also very studious, and he was also the kind of kid that if he saw you do something wrong, would tell. So he was also a teller. You know, he would tell back to the village, say, that oldest Fletcher boy, Ritas, you know, he had no business doing this, that, and the other. It was kind of in the beginnings of an extension of the impact that Carl had on the three of us, but even more people throughout our early existence and through college.
Carl was the trailblazer of the group, inspiring his younger brothers to follow in his footsteps by attending Morehead State College. After transferring in 1967, he became one of the first 7 Black students at MSC. His dedication to social justice and education led him to help establish Project Equality, a program focused on bringing diversity to the campus. His efforts and speeches, especially at Central High, influenced his brothers Louis, Ritas, and Russell to attend MSC, making them the only Rondo residents to do so.
When I was headed to Morehead, I was kind of excited. It was going to be a new experience.
The thing that struck me the most, the diversity of the students that were there, and also the demeanor and the acceptance and the assistance that you got from a lot of the administrators. And I was particularly impressed that we got up there and, you know, there were like 25, 30 that were participating in this Project Equality, which brought minority students, primarily Black, from around the country.
In the late 60s, it appears as though there was some effort across Minnesota to start to diversify the population within their campuses. Minnesota State University Morehead is part of a system collective. So there was most likely conversations that took place system-wide. It appears to me that a lot of the Project Equality information began around the year that Dr. King was assassinated. From my understanding, the conception of it was to do exactly that, to increase African-American students, Hispanic students, and then also indigenous students on our campus. And so the primary goal was to diversify the student body. Along with that, they tried to overcome some recruitment barriers.
Fargo was a highly racist place, actually. If you went into Fargo by yourself, you would have difficulty at that time.
I had my mother come up early on to take a look, as I felt like it was a very racist atmosphere. And she came up and she was all dressed up and had her suit, her stole on, and someone threw an orange from one of the dorm windows out at us. And she looked at the orange and she looked at me. She looked at her watch. She said, "Mother's got to catch her plane, but you can do this."
I had a girlfriend at Morehead State College that was white at that time. And she wanted me to pick her up at work. And so I did. I picked her up at work and brought her back to the campus, okay? The next day she went into work and they gave her her final check. In other words, that was it because I picked her up. And they saw that I had picked her up, and that was the end of her working at that particular establishment.
The Cultural Exchange Center was a place where we could come and at first talk to each other, and then white students were invited in to come and hear how we were feeling.
The message in which I heard from them, in which they came with, was you're going to experience problems. That's a part of the journey. You need to figure out how to overcome it, and you're gonna have to do it with a smile on your face.
I think that what we tried to do was to say to them, you have your lifestyle, you have your family style, you have your community style, you keep it. You keep whatever has been important to you before you came to college. Not only must you amplify it by your own experiences, you're going to do something significant, you must realize that there are going to be hardships and there'll be times that they're going to be tough, but you have to stand up for it. That's what you're here for. You're here to make a difference not only in your own lives, but to make a difference in the lives of other people who've never seen African Americans, who've never heard of African Americans. And I think they accepted that. I really think they did a good job of being able to work with students and to be able to communicate with them and to say, well, I'm here too. I want to do the same thing you want to do. I want to get an education.
What I didn't count on was that when I had faced adversity or challenges in the past, I could always end up going home. That support just wasn't there. That was kind of a problem that I had. I also had a problem with, I was one of those kids that went through high school that never studied. I never had to study. I could ace out anything. I could skim read something and, I could get, well, when you get to college, there's a whole different program. And I didn't know how to study.
I wasn't receiving the grades that I was used to, and I wasn't quite sure where the disconnect was, because when I felt like it had gone far enough, I went to the dean and showed him what I had, and my grades were changed. What concerned me was I going to have to go through that all the time?
Eventually what happened was that I was able to get academic assistance, and we had some black professors that helped me do that, Wendell Gorham in particular.
I feel like that I found my community when I went into the theater and became a part of that whole scene. And it took a lot of pressure off, because I was tired of talking about the issues with black folks and white folks and all. Like in the theater, if someone doesn't show up for their part or misses, you might get that part. Russ, go do those lines. And it allowed me to focus on you. You learn everyone's part. And you feel like you're accomplishing something when you move up in that theater. So that felt good, and that probably changed the experience that I was having.
I wish that there had been some type of assistance being a freshman, knowing the ins and outs of taking classes, and if you weren't doing well in a class, drop it, get rid of it. I tried to stick it through, and I didn't do well my first year of college. My grades were horrible. It changed though. It changed when I met individuals and began to get that information, such as my RA, Frank Rutherford, such as members of a fraternity. I thought that was really something that they would want me to pledge their fraternity.
They quickly realized he was a man of high character, he was friendly, he was a good communicator, and we knew that from instinct that he would fit right in, and that's exactly what happened.
It was called Xi Omega when I got into it, but then we went national. We became Phi Sigma Epsilon. And I went through that whole process, So I became, one of the initial members of Phi Sigma Epsilon. And they liked me so well that they promoted me to vice president of the fraternity. And I thought that was quite an opportunity for me.
They were very mature for their 17, 18, 19 year olds. And I think it's because of the neighborhood, where they were allowed to be leaders. I mean, I can imagine that Carl could go tell somebody, you know, I think you need to do something about your front yard. And he said in a very noble way. You wouldn't get mad at it, but you knew you better get that front yard cleaned up. So it was that kind of thing. They were very persuasive and wanted to be a part of the community and to make their contributions. And I remember that they were very stately. I mean, they stood up and they spoke out. And that was the thing that I remembered about them. They spoke out and they were very clear in their aspirations. Yes, so I was glad to see them some 40 years later and how well they had done. They had done extremely well, which was just admirable for me to think that we had something to do with that. Maybe not everything, but we had something to do with it. So we were very proud of them.
After graduation from Morehead State College, I happened to run into a friend of the family at church. His name was Clarence. And he asked me what I was doing. And I told him that I had just graduated. And he said, have you thought about talking to somebody at the Urban League? Because they've been looking for people to fill a new program that they're having for exceptional children. And Larry was telling me about the program, that it was for preschoolers that had special needs. And one of them would be speech and language, so that they were looking for a speech pathologist and if I would be interested in that. And so they added me to their team. I began working with kids, preschool kids. I had a classroom of only about 5 or 6 kids. And all those kids needed speech pathology and speech help. And I provided them those services. I also did a lot of the testing. We had a psychologist that did the psychological kinds of testing. They used me to do the speech and language testing on the students, so that we could find out what type of services they actually needed and what we needed to do in terms of writing their learning prescriptions. They called them learning prescriptions at the time. So I did that. I did that for about 2.5 years. And as a speech pathologist, I was given 4 or 5 schools to cover. So I was quite busy. I decided to go back to school and get an administrative degree. When Horace Mann came knocking on the door, Horace Mann is one of the highest scoring schools in the St. Paul School District. Horace Mann interviewed me, and they wanted me there. So I had to make a choice on what I wanted to do. Decided that I was going to take the Horace Mann job because it would bring more notoriety to the school. And again, I was the first black principal that they ever had at Horace Mann. So I took that position. I was there for 9 years. And the school maintained a high standing in the community and maintained a high degree of notoriety. So my last 2.5 years with the St. Paul Public Schools, I worked as executive director in charge of 26 elementary schools. I also did what's called CFY with speech pathologists who wanted their certificate of clinical competence. I also had some teachers who wanted to become administrators, and so I helped them with that, become administrators. And a lot of those teachers were minority teachers. So we tried to get them placed as administrators as well. And then I decided it was time to retire after 33 years with St. Paul Schools, and then 3 years with St. Paul Urban League. So I had a total of 36 years of public school education here in St. Paul.
After school, I went to work for the city of St. Paul I had been exposed primarily through these summer youth programs to economic development agencies of the city. Was offered an opportunity to come work for the city in the economic development areas. Initially, I went to work in workforce preparation programs. I was able to move through the Economic Development Agency into business assistance programs and more real estate development within the city of St. Paul in a different classification. Minnesota built a World Trade Center because Minnesota was going to become the international capital, Midwest international capital of international trade, and we built a facility to do that. I was part of that. I developed videos for Minnesota businesses to sell products overseas, product videos, and had those videos developed and then transferred into the language and electronic formats to support the sale of surgical equipment, MRIs, a whole bunch of different activities. I was able to do that because I had moved from executive positions to a legislative position. I became the legislative aide to the first African American elected to the St. Paul City Council on a citywide basis. Bill Wilson was his name, was elected citywide, not ward-wide, where he received as many votes as the mayor of St. Paul, which was significant for African American in St. Paul. It was a giant step. After I retired professionally, and I was contacted by officials from St. Paul Central's committee to see if I would accept placement on the St. Paul Central Hall of Fame, primarily for achievements that I had done throughout my career. Initially, I was very reluctant to do that because I had felt that there was so many that had gone before me and had been placed in that status. Also that there were so many elements of people that helped me achieve what I achieved that I didn't truly belong. However, after several kinds of conversations, I agreed to do it. Part of that acceptance was that I would participate in talking to the body of St. Paul Central about my experiences at St. Paul Central, my experiences as a son of Rondo, my experiences later on in life as a professional. When it came to the actual presentation in front of the St. Paul student body, I was amazed at the turnout. I was amazed at the reception. I expected that if they were to take anything from my presentation that they were going to hear, it would be to value your wealth, take care of your health. And what I've done in life is really the direct result of where I came from and the elders that took care of me and guided me, the schools that prepared me, both Maxfield, St. Peter Claver, St. Paul Central, all of them part of the big village of Rondo, and that was critical to my participation in life, and I'm forever grateful for that.
The first black buyer in the St. Paul Gillette Tony Company. After that, affirmative action was just becoming the thing, and I was affirmative action officer for the Department of Public Welfare. I worked for the Urban League doing employment for a while, and I would meet people that had been in some type of trouble and had done some time, and I don't know where I got the courage to ask people, would you give this individual a chance? Would you allow me to have 3 slots in your operation so I could bring you people, but a lot of times I'll give you one slot. So I had a kid that had done 5 years. He'd never done anything else. It was a drug deal. And his mother, who had adopted him, was a white woman, came and she begged me to give her son a job. So this kid came in and I gave him the job. I told him how to do the job. It was shortly after he decided he wanted to go to school. He said he needed an hour to run over to the University of Minnesota. I said, it'll take you 2 hours. I'm gonna let you do it. He did a good job. He dressed sharper than I was, and I was worried that he was doing something he shouldn't be doing. He told me he was gonna be a lawyer, and I thought to myself, they'll never let you be a lawyer. Later on, he invited me to his swearing in, and I asked him, I was worried about you when you were wearing all those suits. And he said, I never had a job before, I was just copying you. I realized then something could happen with those people who were doing time. And I went and I started a circle at Stillwater Prison. I would find people, volunteers, who would be a one-to-one friend with different ones that wanted one there. It was right at that time that my oldest grandchild had been shot. He lived, he was shot in the arm, and then he was shot again. And it was at that time I realized the weather was changing. I got to do something about this. Yesterday was the last group's last day, and it was our 650th meeting. We've been doing this for over 13 years. I feel like it's been my best work. It's been an amazing experience, and we've never gotten paid for it. Makes me emotional. I'm from Ward 1, the home of Rondo, the heart and soul of the city. So I applied for the position where the councilman left and had an interview and got the position. The first call I got was from Ritas saying, you really done it this time? Made me a little nervous, but I knew he could tell me what to do. And it's been a very powerful experience. And it will be over at the end of December. And there have been changes that I've been involved with that has really made it a powerful experience. We knew what community was and we knew how to rebuild community. And we took that with us everywhere we went. I was able to serve on the city council for Ward 1 here, and it was one of the biggest honors in my life. I had about 20 minutes left on the council when I said the name's got to be Rondo again. And when it passed, I felt like that was my bow and I was ready to leave.
Two, three.
Carl also co-founded the Afro-American Friendship Organization, uniting students from local colleges in the Fargo-Moorhead area. He pursued his passion for journalism by working with the campus paper, The Mystic, and became the first African-American reporter for The Forum, Fargo's newspaper. His activism extended to the anti-war movement, with one of his most impactful moments being a powerful speech following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After working at The Forum, Carl advanced his journalism career as a news assistant at The Washington Post, and later as a reporter and columnist for the Minneapolis Tribune. In 1980, he launched nonprofit programs for organizations such as the American Red Cross, Pillsbury United Neighborhood Services, Phyllis Wheatley Community Center, and Plymouth Christian Youth Center. Carl's dedication to social justice, community building, and cultural diversity earned him recognition from various groups, including the National American Red Cross for cultural diversity. Even after retiring, he remained committed to social justice, focusing on racial equity and LGBTQ rights.
I looked up to him because even though he was respectful, nice, and kind. He didn't take any BS from anybody, you know, and glad to have someone like him in my life as a role model, because without him, I don't know who I'd be.
One of his most impactful achievements was uniting his brothers to share their stories, a project that became the Brothers of Rondo.
You are your brother's keeper. We should all strive to do the best we can and help this world.
I don't know what else to call us, but we're the Rondo brothers.